The rain hammered against the windows of Sarah Chen's modest townhouse in Portland, Oregon, creating a symphony that matched the chaos brewing inside her heart. At 64, Sarah had weathered many storms in her life, but nothing had prepared her for the ultimatum that would shatter her world on this gray February morning. She stood in her cozy living room, clutching a cup of chamomile tea with trembling hands, staring at the empty dog bed by the fireplace, where her beloved golden retriever, Honey, used to curl up every evening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days ago, Sarah had made the most heartbreaking decision of her life. She had driven to the animal shelter on Burnside Avenue and surrendered the one companion who had kept her sane through 5 years of widowhood. The woman at the intake desk had asked if she was sure, noting that Honey was clearly well cared for and deeply bonded to her owner. Sarah had simply nodded, unable to trust her voice, and walked away without looking back. Now, sitting in the deafening silence of her home, Sarah realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The ultimatum had come from her son Michael, delivered with the cold precision of a corporate executive during what was supposed to be a pleasant Sunday dinner. "Mom, it's me or the dog," he had said, his voice devoid of the warmth she remembered from his childhood. "If you want to see your grandchildren again, if you want to be part of this family, that animal has to go." Sarah had stared at her 42-year-old son across her dining room table, searching his face for any trace of the compassionate boy who used to rescue injured birds and nurse stray cats back to health. Sarah Chen had never imagined that love could become a weapon, but as she reflected on the events that led to this moment, she began to understand how gradually she had surrendered her autonomy to avoid conflict with the only family she had left. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, until she found herself living in fear of disappointing the son who had once looked up to her as his hero. The story began 5 years earlier, when Sarah's husband Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 61. Robert had been Sarah's anchor for 38 years, her college sweetheart who had supported her through nursing school, celebrated her career achievements, and stood by her side through their struggles with infertility and the joy of finally adopting Michael when he was 3 years old. When Robert died, Sarah felt like half of herself had been ripped away, leaving her to navigate a world that suddenly felt foreign and overwhelming. The grief had been suffocating. Sarah would wake up each morning, reaching for Robert's warm presence, only to find cold sheets and the crushing reality that he was never coming back. She had tried to maintain her routine, continuing her work as a pediatric nurse at Oregon Health Sciences University, but the long shifts felt endless, and coming home to an empty house became unbearable. Her colleagues noticed her declining spirits, and her supervisor, Janet Morrison, had gently suggested that Sarah might benefit from some companionship. "Have you ever considered getting a pet?" Janet had asked during one of their monthly check-ins. "I know it sounds simplistic, but there's real research showing that animal companionship can help with grief recovery." Sarah had initially dismissed the idea. She and Robert had never owned pets, partly due to their demanding work schedules, and partly because they had poured all their nurturing energy into raising Michael. But as the loneliness continued to consume her, Sarah found herself browsing the Oregon Humane Society website late at night, looking at photos of dogs and cats waiting for homes. That's when she first saw Honey. The 3-year-old golden retriever had been surrendered by a family who claimed they could no longer care for her due to a job relocation. The shelter staff described Honey as gentle, house-trained, and excellent with children. In the photo, Honey's soulful brown eyes seemed to look directly at Sarah, and something in that gaze reminded her of Robert's patient, understanding expression. Without really planning to, Sarah found herself driving to the shelter the next Saturday morning. The moment Sarah walked into the adoption area, Honey had approached the kennel door with her tail wagging cautiously, as if she somehow understood that this human might be the answer to her own loneliness. When the volunteer opened the kennel, Honey had walked directly to Sarah and sat beside her, leaning her warm body against Sarah's leg. The connection was immediate and profound. Sarah knelt down and looked into Honey's eyes, seeing not just an animal, but a kindred spirit who had also experienced loss and displacement. "She's been waiting for the right person," the volunteer had said with a knowing smile. Some dogs just know when they've found their match. The adoption process was surprisingly straightforward. Sarah filled out the paperwork, paid the fees, and within 2 hours she was driving home with Honey sitting calmly in the passenger seat, occasionally placing her golden head on Sarah's arm, as if to say, "We're going to be okay together." The first few weeks with Honey had been transformative. Sarah discovered that caring for another living being gave structure to her days and purpose to her mornings. She had to get up to feed Honey, take her for walks, and provide the attention and affection that a dog needs to thrive. The routine forced Sarah out of the depressive spiral she had been caught in since Robert's death. More importantly, Honey's unconditional love and constant presence began to heal the deep wound of loneliness that had been consuming Sarah's heart. Honey was an intuitive companion who seemed to understand Sarah's emotional needs without training or instruction. On days when Sarah felt overwhelmed by grief, Honey would rest her head on Sarah's lap and stay perfectly still, offering silent comfort. When Sarah felt restless or anxious, Honey would bring her a toy or position herself by the door, encouraging a walk that would benefit both of them. Evenings that had once stretched endlessly in solitude became cozy hours of reading, with Honey curled up beside Sarah on the sofa, her steady breathing a soothing reminder that Sarah was no longer alone. The bond between Sarah and Honey deepened with each passing month. They developed their own routines and rituals. Every morning, Honey would wait patiently by the coffee maker while Sarah prepared for her day, then accompany her to the front door for their goodbye routine. Sarah would kneel down, scratch behind Honey's ears, and say, "Be a good girl while I'm gone. I'll be back before you know it." When Sarah returned from work, Honey's enthusiastic greeting made her feel welcomed and loved in a way she hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Their weekend adventures became the highlight of Sarah's week. They would explore different parks around Portland, with Honey's joy at discovering new scents and meeting other dogs reminding Sarah of the simple pleasures she had forgotten during her darkest period of grief. At Laurelhurst Park, Honey had befriended a border collie named Scout, whose owner, Margaret, became Sarah's first new friend in years. The two women would walk their dogs together, sharing stories about their lives and finding comfort in their shared love for their canine companions. Sarah began to rebuild her social life around activities that included Honey. She joined a hiking group for dog owners, volunteered at local pet adoption events, and even enrolled in a dog training class where she and Honey learned advanced obedience skills together. The training sessions revealed Honey's intelligence and eagerness to please, strengthening their communication and deepening their partnership. Sarah felt proud introducing Honey to new people, describing her as my rescue dog, who rescued me right back. Michael's initial reaction to Honey had been neutral, perhaps even mildly positive. During his first visit after Sarah adopted Honey, he had petted her briefly and commented that she seemed like a nice dog. Michael lived across town with his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Tyler. As a successful financial advisor, Michael maintained a busy schedule that limited his visits to Sarah to brief Sunday dinners every few weeks.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
He seemed relieved that his mother had found something to occupy her time and attention, perhaps lessening his own sense of obligation to check on her constantly. For the first 2 years, the arrangement worked well for everyone. Sarah felt fulfilled and content with Honey's companionship, while Michael could focus on his career and family without worrying about his mother's well-being. Sarah would occasionally mention Honey during their phone conversations, sharing amusing stories about her dog's personality quirks or accomplishments in training class. Michael would listen politely, sometimes even laughing at Honey's antics, and Sarah interpreted his tolerance as acceptance. The first sign of trouble came during Emma's 7th birthday party, which Sarah had hosted at her house. She had spent days preparing decorations, baking Emma's favorite chocolate cake, and planning activities for the children. Honey had been on her best behavior, staying calmly in the living room while the children played in the backyard. When it was time for cake, Emma had specifically asked if Honey could join them, and Sarah had allowed her to lie quietly beside the dining room table. Everything had gone smoothly until Tyler, who was 4 at the time, decided to share his piece of cake with Honey. Before Sarah could intervene, Tyler had dropped chocolate frosting on the floor, and Honey had quickly licked it up. Jennifer had immediately become agitated, expressing concern about hygiene and questioning whether it was appropriate to have a dog present during a children's party. Michael had supported his wife's concerns, suggesting that in the future, Honey should be confined to another room when the grandchildren were visiting. Sarah had felt embarrassed and defensive, but had agreed to be more careful about managing Honey during family gatherings. She began putting Honey in the bedroom when Michael's family came for dinner, feeling guilty about isolating her beloved companion, but wanting to maintain peace with her son. Honey would whine softly from behind the closed door, clearly confused about why she was suddenly excluded from family activities. Sarah would sneak away periodically to check on her, offering treats and reassurance, but she could see the hurt and confusion in Honey's eyes. As time passed, Michael's criticism of Honey became more frequent and specific. He complained about dog hair on Sarah's furniture, even though Sarah vacuumed regularly and used lint rollers before every visit. He expressed concern about potential liability if Honey ever bit someone, despite the fact that Honey had never shown any aggressive tendencies and had passed her canine good citizen test with flying colors. He questioned the expense of dog food, veterinary bills, and grooming costs, suggesting that Sarah was spending money frivolously when she should be saving for her future care needs. Each criticism felt like a personal attack on Sarah's judgment and priorities. She found herself constantly defending Honey's behavior and her own choices, trying to prove that having a dog was not the selfish indulgence Michael seemed to believe it was. Sarah began to modify her life to accommodate Michael's growing list of objections. She hired a professional groomer to keep Honey's shedding to a minimum. She enrolled in additional training classes to ensure Honey's behavior was absolutely perfect. She even considered pet insurance to address Michael's concerns about unexpected veterinary expenses. Despite Sarah's efforts to address every concern, Michael's attitude toward Honey continued to deteriorate. During family dinners, he would make pointed comments about the smell of dog food or express irritation if Honey moved around the house during their visit. He began arriving at Sarah's home with a critical eye, looking for evidence of pet-related messiness or inconvenience. Sarah felt like she was being inspected and judged, her home and lifestyle evaluated against standards she hadn't agreed to but felt pressured to meet. The tension reached a new level when Jennifer announced that Tyler had developed mild allergies, though it was unclear whether they were related to environmental factors, food sensitivities, or pet dander. Without waiting for medical clarification, Michael immediately assumed that Honey was the culprit and suggested that Sarah's house was no longer a suitable environment for the grandchildren. He proposed that family gatherings should move to restaurants or his own home, effectively limiting Sarah's role as hostess and grandmother in her own space. Sarah felt increasingly isolated and resentful, but was terrified of creating a conflict that might damage her relationship with Michael and her access to her grandchildren. She loved Emma and Tyler deeply, and couldn't bear the thought of missing their childhood milestones because of a disagreement about her dog. At the same time, the idea of giving up Honey felt like betraying the companion who had helped her survive the darkest period of her life. Sarah found herself caught between two loves, unable to imagine her life without either her dog or her family. The breaking point came on a cold Sunday in February, when Michael arrived for dinner with a particularly stern expression and a manila folder tucked under his arm. Sarah had prepared his favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables, and had confined Honey to the bedroom, as had become their routine. She hoped that a pleasant meal and conversation about the children's activities might lighten Michael's mood, but she could sense an underlying tension that made her stomach clench with anxiety. After dinner, Michael opened the folder and spread several documents across Sarah's dining room table. They were printouts of articles about pet-related injuries, statistics about elderly people being knocked down by large dogs, and information about the costs of pet ownership for seniors. He had clearly spent considerable time researching ammunition for a conversation that Sarah sensed was going to change everything between them. "Mom, we need to have a serious talk about your situation here," Michael began, his tone taking on the authoritative quality he used in business meetings. "Jennifer and I have been discussing our concerns about Honey, and we think it's time to face some hard realities." Sarah felt her throat tighten as she looked at the papers spread before her, realizing that her son had been building a case against her beloved companion. Michael proceeded to outline his arguments with the systematic approach of a prosecutor presenting evidence. He pointed to statistics about hip fractures in elderly women, suggesting that Honey posed a significant fall risk. He referenced articles about the financial burden of pet ownership, implying that Sarah was being irresponsible with her limited retirement income. He mentioned Tyler's allergies, though no doctor had confirmed a specific sensitivity to dogs, and suggested that Sarah was prioritizing a pet over her grandson's health and comfort. "But Michael," Sarah interrupted, her voice shaky but determined, "Honey has never caused any problems. She's well-trained, gentle, and she's been such a comfort to me since your father died. I don't understand why you're so set against her." Sarah searched her son's face for any sign of the empathy she remembered from his younger years, but his expression remained cold and resolute. Michael's response revealed the depth of his resentment and the control he sought to exert over his mother's life. "Mom, you're 64 years old. You need to start thinking practically about your future, instead of playing house with a dog. What happens when you fall and break a hip? What happens when you can't afford her veterinary bills? What happens when you need to move to assisted living? You're being selfish and short-sighted, and frankly, it's embarrassing." The word embarrassing hit Sarah like a physical blow. She realized that Michael's objections weren't really about safety or finances or allergies. They were about image and control. He was embarrassed by his mother's devotion to a dog, viewing it as a sign of weakness or eccentricity that reflected poorly on him. He wanted her to conform to his vision of appropriate behavior for a woman her age, which apparently didn't include the deep bond she had formed with Honey. "Michael, I understand you're concerned about me, but Honey isn't a burden. She's a blessing. She keeps me active, gives me purpose, and provides companionship that I desperately needed after losing your father. I can't imagine my life without her," Sarah said, hoping to help her son understand the depth of her connection to Honey and the positive impact the dog had on her well-being. Michael's face hardened further as he delivered the ultimatum that would force Sarah to choose between the two relationships that defined her world. "Mom, I'm not asking you to imagine it. I'm telling you that if you want to continue having a relationship with me, Jennifer, and the kids, that dog has to go. I'm not going to keep bringing my children around an unpredictable animal. And I'm not going to watch you drain your savings on veterinary bills when you should be planning for your own future care." Sarah felt the room spinning around her as the full implications of Michael's demand became clear. He wasn't just asking her to give up Honey. He was threatening to cut off her access to her grandchildren, to withdraw his presence from her life, to leave her completely alone if she didn't comply with his wishes. The manipulation was sophisticated and devastating, using her love for Emma and Tyler as leverage to force her to abandon the companion who had saved her from despair. "You can't be serious," Sarah whispered, looking at her son with new eyes and seeing a stranger who was willing to use emotional blackmail to get his way. "You're asking me to choose between my dog and my family. How can you put me in that position?" Michael's response was delivered with the cold efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was prepared for resistance. "I'm not putting you in any position, Mom. You're putting yourself in this position by prioritizing a dog over your human family. It's really very simple. Choose what matters most to you. If it's the dog, then you've made your choice about what kind of relationship you want with us." Sarah spent the next 3 days in agony, barely sleeping or eating as she wrestled with the impossible decision Michael had forced upon her. She would look at Honey, who sensed her distress and stayed close to her side, offering silent comfort during the most difficult crisis of Sarah's life. She would think about Emma and Tyler, imagining a future where she missed their school plays, birthday parties, and holiday celebrations because she had chosen to keep her dog. The weight of loneliness and fear ultimately overcame Sarah's instinct to fight for what she knew was right. On Wednesday morning, she made the heartbreaking drive to the Oregon Humane Society, with Honey sitting trustingly in the passenger seat, unaware that their life together was about to end. Sarah had to pull over twice during the 20-minute drive because she was crying too hard to see the road clearly. At the shelter, Sarah filled out the surrender paperwork with shaking hands, explaining that a family situation made it impossible for her to continue caring for Honey. The intake coordinator was kind but professional, noting Honey's excellent condition and temperament. As Sarah handed over Honey's leash, her beloved companion looked up at her with confusion and trust, still believing that Sarah would protect her and keep her safe. Walking away from Honey was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. She could hear Honey whimpering and trying to follow her, and Sarah had to resist every instinct that told her to turn around and take her dog home where she belonged. She drove home in a state of shock, unable to process what she had just done, or imagine how she would survive in the empty house that awaited her. Now, 3 days later, Sarah sat in her living room, surrounded by the silence she had thought she wanted to avoid. Michael had called that evening to express his approval of her decision, and to invite her to Sunday dinner with the family. His tone was warm and pleased, as if Sarah had finally demonstrated the maturity and wisdom he expected from his mother. But instead of feeling relieved or vindicated, Sarah felt hollow and ashamed. The house felt wrong without Honey's presence. Sarah found herself listening for the sound of paws on the hardwood floors, looking toward the door expecting to see Honey's greeting ritual, reaching for the leash that no longer hung by the front door. She had given up the one relationship that asked nothing of her except love and loyalty, choosing instead to maintain connection with family members who were willing to manipulate her deepest fears to control her behavior. As Sarah sat with her cold tea, watching the rain streak down her windows, she began to realize that she had made a terrible mistake. Not because Michael was wrong about the practical challenges of pet ownership for seniors, but because she had allowed fear to override her own judgment and values. She had taught her son, through her compliance, that emotional manipulation was an acceptable way to get what he wanted from her. She had betrayed Honey's trust and love to avoid conflict with someone who was supposed to love her unconditionally. Sarah understood now that the choice Michael had forced upon her was never really about Honey. It was about power and control, about who would define the terms of their relationship, and who would make the decisions about how Sarah lived her life. By surrendering Honey, Sarah had essentially told her son that his approval was more important to her than her own happiness, her own judgment, and her own capacity to love and be loved by another living being. The rain continued to fall against the windows as Sarah made a decision that would require more courage than she had ever needed before. She was going to get Honey back. Not because it would be easy or because it wouldn't create conflict with Michael, but because it was the right thing to do. Sarah was going to reclaim her autonomy, her home, and her heart, even if it meant losing the son who had shown her that his love came with conditions she could no longer meet. Sarah stood up from her chair, dumped her cold tea down the sink, and reached for her car keys. The Oregon Humane Society would be open for another hour, and Sarah prayed that 3 days hadn't been too long, that Honey would still be there waiting for someone to love her the way she deserved to be loved. As Sarah drove through the rain toward what she hoped would be a reunion, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the fierce determination of a woman who was finally ready to fight for what mattered most to her. The fluorescent lights of the Oregon Humane Society buzzed overhead as Sarah approached the front desk with her heart hammering against her ribs. She had rehearsed what she would say during the drive over, but now that she was actually standing in the building where she had made the worst decision of her life 3 days ago, the words seemed inadequate and desperate. The young woman behind the counter looked up with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to dealing with emotional situations. "I surrendered my dog 3 days ago," Sarah began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "Her name is Honey, a golden retriever. I need to know if she's still available for adoption." The coordinator's expression shifted from professional pleasantness to something more complicated as she recognized Sarah from Wednesday's tearful surrender. "Let me check our system," the woman said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. Sarah held her breath, terrified that she might be too late, that someone else might have already fallen in love with Honey's gentle spirit and taken her home. The seconds stretched like hours, as Sarah waited for information that would determine whether she could begin to undo the damage she had caused. She's still here, the coordinator said, and Sarah felt her knees weaken with relief. She's been a little depressed since you brought her in, not eating much, spending most of her time lying by the kennel door. The staff has been concerned about her adjustment. Each word hit Sarah like a knife to the heart, as she imagined Honey waiting and watching for her return, not understanding why she had been abandoned by the person she trusted most. "Can I see her?" Sarah asked, already knowing that if she looked into Honey's eyes again, there would be no going back. She would have to find the strength to rebuild their life together, regardless of the consequences with Michael. When they arrived home, Honey bounded out of the car and raced to the front door, her tail wagging furiously as she waited for Sarah to unlock their sanctuary. Once inside, Honey ran through the house as if taking inventory, checking all her favorite spots and seeming to reassure herself that everything was as she remembered. She found her food and water bowls, still in their usual place because Sarah hadn't been able to bring herself to put them away. She discovered her tennis ball under the coffee table and brought it to Sarah with the proud expression of someone who had found a long-lost treasure. That evening, as Sarah and Honey settled into their familiar routine on the sofa, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Honey curled up beside her, resting her head on Sarah's lap, and both of them seemed to exhale the tension and fear of their brief separation. Sarah stroked Honey's ears and made a promise that she intended to keep for the rest of their lives together. "I will never abandon you again," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever happens with Michael, whatever consequences I have to face, you and I are family. We take care of each other." Honey's tail thumped against the sofa cushions, as if she understood and accepted Sarah's vow. The phone rang at 8 o'clock, and Sarah's stomach clenched when she saw Michael's name on the caller ID. She had known this conversation was inevitable, but she still wasn't sure she had the strength to stand up to her son's anger and disappointment. Sarah took a deep breath and answered the phone, prepared for the battle she had been avoiding her entire adult life. "Hi, Michael," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady and calm. Honey looked up at her as if sensing the importance of this moment, offering her silent support for whatever was about to happen. "Mom, I just wanted to call and tell you how proud I am of you for making the right decision about the dog," Michael began, his tone warm and approving. "Jennifer and I were talking about having you over for dinner this weekend, maybe taking the kids to that new pizza place they've been wanting to try." Sarah closed her eyes, realizing that Michael had no idea she had already undone the decision he was praising. "Michael, I need to tell you something," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I went back to the shelter today and adopted Honey again. She's here with me now, and she's staying." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough for Sarah to hear her own heartbeat in her ears. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was cold and controlled in a way that reminded Sarah of his father during their worst arguments. "Mom, I thought we had settled this. I thought you understood the situation and made the mature choice. What exactly are you thinking?" Sarah had prepared for this question during her drive home from the shelter, and she answered with more confidence than she had felt in years. "I'm thinking that I made a decision based on fear instead of wisdom. I'm thinking that I gave up something precious to avoid conflict with you, and that's not the kind of person I want to be. I'm thinking that Honey is my family too, and I'm not going to abandon her again." Michael's response revealed the depth of his need to control his mother's choices, and his unwillingness to accept her autonomy. "Mom, if you bring that dog back, you're choosing it over your own son and grandchildren. I meant what I said about not exposing my kids to that situation. If you want to be part of this family, you need to act like it." Sarah felt the familiar flutter of panic at the thought of losing access to Emma and Tyler, but this time she pushed through the fear to a place of clarity she had never reached before. "Michael, if you're willing to cut me out of your children's lives because I love my dog, then maybe the problem isn't with my choices. Maybe the problem is with someone who thinks love should come with conditions and ultimatums." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Michael becoming increasingly angry and Sarah becoming increasingly resolute. He accused her of being selfish and irresponsible. She accused him of being manipulative and controlling. He threatened to limit her contact with the grandchildren. She told him that she wouldn't be manipulated by threats anymore. When Michael finally hung up in frustration, Sarah felt simultaneously heartbroken and liberated. Honey had stayed close to Sarah throughout the phone call, seeming to sense the emotional stakes of the conversation. When Sarah finally put down the phone, Honey rested her head on Sarah's knee and looked up at her with eyes full of love and gratitude. Sarah realized that while she might have lost her son's approval, she had gained something equally valuable: her self-respect and the knowledge that she was capable of fighting for what mattered to her. The following weeks were difficult, as Sarah adjusted to the reality of her strained relationship with Michael and the uncertainty about her future contact with her grandchildren. Michael didn't call, and when Sarah tried to reach him, he either didn't answer or kept their conversations brief and chilly. She missed Emma and Tyler terribly, but she refused to surrender Honey again, to repair a relationship that had become based on fear and control rather than love and respect. Sarah found support in unexpected places. Her colleague Janet applauded her decision and shared her own story of standing up to adult children who had tried to control her living situation. Margaret, her friend from the dog park, became a closer confidant as Sarah navigated the emotional aftermath of her choice. Dr. Peterson, Sarah's physician, affirmed that pet ownership was beneficial for her physical and mental health, contradicting Michael's claims about the risks Honey posed to her safety. Most importantly, Sarah began to rebuild her relationship with herself. She had spent so many years trying to be the mother Michael wanted, the widow Robert would have approved of, the woman everyone expected her to be, that she had lost touch with her own desires and values. Living with Honey's unconditional love reminded Sarah that she was worthy of affection without having to earn it through compliance or self-sacrifice. 3 months after Sarah reclaimed Honey from the shelter, she received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer. Michael's wife sounded tentative and slightly embarrassed as she explained that Emma had been asking repeatedly about Grandma Sarah and wanted to know when they could visit again. Jennifer had apparently been struggling with her own discomfort about the ultimatum Michael had issued and the way it had fractured their family. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling directly," Jennifer said. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I'm not sure Michael was fair to you. Emma keeps asking about Honey and whether you're lonely without her. I think maybe we could figure out a way to make this work for everyone." Sarah felt a surge of hope tempered by caution. She loved Jennifer and appreciated her willingness to reach out, but she wasn't willing to compromise Honey's place in her life to smooth over family tensions. "I'd love to see the children, Jennifer. They're always welcome in my home. But I need you to understand that Honey is part of my family now. I'm not going to put her away or pretend she doesn't exist to make other people comfortable." Jennifer's response surprised Sarah with its honesty and insight. "I think Michael has some control issues that have gotten worse since his father died. He means well, but he sometimes treats people like problems to be solved instead of individuals with their own needs and feelings. Maybe we could start with short visits and see how the kids do with Honey. Tyler's allergies haven't been as bad lately, and Emma has been begging for a pet of her own." The first visit was awkward but encouraging. Emma was immediately enchanted with Honey, who seemed to understand that she needed to be on her best behavior to prove herself worthy of acceptance. Tyler was initially cautious but warmed up when Honey gently brought him her tennis ball as an offering of friendship. Jennifer watched nervously at first, but gradually relaxed as she observed the positive interaction between her children and Sarah's beloved companion. Michael didn't attend that first visit, and Sarah didn't ask about his absence. She focused on rebuilding her relationship with her grandchildren and demonstrating that her love for Honey didn't diminish her love for them. If anything, Honey's presence seemed to make the visits more enjoyable for everyone. The children had a focus for their energy, Sarah had an easy conversation starter when awkward silences arose, and even Jennifer seemed more relaxed in the company of a dog who clearly adored children. Gradually, the visits became more frequent and natural. Emma started asking if she could help feed Honey or take her for walks around the neighborhood. Tyler overcame his initial wariness and began including Honey in his elaborate imaginary games. Jennifer started bringing the children over for longer visits, sometimes staying for dinner and genuinely enjoying the warmth and chaos that Honey brought to their gatherings. Sarah never pressured Jennifer to talk about Michael or tried to use her grandchildren to send messages to her son. She focused on being the best grandmother she could be, which apparently included being a woman who was strong enough to stand up for her principles even when it was difficult. She suspected that her willingness to fight for Honey had actually earned her Jennifer's respect, even if it had cost her Michael's approval. 6 months after their confrontation, Michael finally called Sarah directly. His voice was stiff and formal, but he wasn't actively hostile as he had been during their last conversation. He asked about her health, mentioned that the children had been talking about their visits with her, and eventually worked his way around to acknowledging that things had been strained between them. "Mom, I still think you made a mistake keeping that dog," Michael said, his tone suggesting that he was making a significant concession by even having this conversation. "But Jennifer says the kids are happy spending time with you, and I don't want our disagreement to affect their relationship with their grandmother." Sarah recognized the olive branch for what it was, a partial surrender that allowed Michael to maintain some semblance of control while acknowledging that his ultimatum had failed to achieve its intended result. She could hear the struggle in his voice between his desire to reconnect with her and his reluctance to admit that he had been wrong about Honey. Sarah understood that this conversation represented as much of an apology as she was likely to receive from her stubborn son. "I appreciate you calling, Michael," Sarah said carefully, keeping her tone neutral and non-confrontational. "The children are always welcome here, and so are you. Honey is part of my life now, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for everyone I love." She deliberately avoided saying that she had forgiven him or that everything was fine between them, because neither of those things was entirely true yet. Michael's response revealed the complexity of his emotions and his ongoing struggle to accept his mother's independence. "I just want you to be safe and happy, Mom. I know you think I was being controlling, but I worry about you living alone at your age. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if you get sick or injured and can't take care of yourself, let alone a dog?" For the first time, Sarah heard genuine concern beneath Michael's authoritative tone, and she realized that his attempts to control her life might have stemmed from anxiety rather than mere dominance. The death of his father had left Michael feeling responsible for his mother's well-being, but he had confused responsibility with control, protection with manipulation. Sarah felt a flicker of compassion for her son, even as she remained firm about her boundaries. "Michael, I understand that you worry about me, and I love you for caring," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. "But I need you to trust that I'm capable of making good decisions about my own life. If I ever reach a point where I can't care for Honey properly, I'll face that situation honestly. But right now, she's not a burden. She's a blessing that keeps me active and engaged with life." The conversation ended without resolution, but also without the anger and ultimatums that had characterized their previous exchanges. Michael agreed to consider visiting Sarah's house again, though he made no promises about timing or frequency. Sarah felt cautiously optimistic that they might eventually find a way to rebuild their relationship on more equal terms, with mutual respect replacing the dynamic of parent and child that had persisted long past its usefulness. Over the following months, Sarah discovered that standing up to Michael had changed more than just their relationship. She found herself more assertive in other areas of her life, more willing to advocate for her own needs and preferences, instead of automatically deferring to other people's wishes. At work, she spoke up when scheduling changes would have forced her to miss Honey's veterinary appointments. With friends, she stopped pretending to enjoy activities that bored her in order to avoid disappointing anyone. The transformation was gradual but profound. Sarah began to recognize patterns in her behavior that had developed over decades of prioritizing other people's comfort over her own authenticity. She had spent so many years being the accommodating wife, the supportive mother, the agreeable colleague, that she had lost touch with her own preferences and opinions. Honey's unwavering love and acceptance had given Sarah a safe space to rediscover who she was when she wasn't performing a role for someone else's benefit. Sarah's relationship with her grandchildren continued to flourish during this period of self-discovery. Emma, now 9 years old, had become Honey's devoted admirer and self-appointed protector. She would arrive at Sarah's house with treats she had saved from her own lunch and elaborate plans for games that included Honey as a central participant. Emma's natural empathy and love for animals reminded Sarah of the compassionate child Michael had once been, before adult responsibilities and anxieties had hardened his heart against vulnerability. Tyler, who had turned 6, had overcome his initial wariness of Honey and now treated her like a beloved playmate. He would whisper secrets in her ear, include her in his elaborate fantasy games, and insist that she sit beside him during story time. Sarah loved watching her grandson's confidence grow as he learned to care for and communicate with an animal who accepted him exactly as he was, without judgment or expectation. The children's obvious joy in Honey's presence made Jennifer increasingly uncomfortable with Michael's continued resistance to accepting the dog as part of their extended family. During one visit, Sarah overheard Jennifer on the phone with Michael, defending the children's attachment to Honey, and questioning whether his concerns were really about safety or simply about winning a battle of wills with his mother. "The kids love her, Michael," Jennifer said, her voice carrying clearly from the kitchen where she thought she was speaking privately. "Honey is gentle, well-trained, and obviously devoted to your mother. Emma keeps asking why Daddy doesn't want to meet Grandma's dog. What am I supposed to tell her?" Sarah felt grateful for Jennifer's advocacy, but also sad that her son was missing the opportunity to see how much joy Honey brought to his own children. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on a rainy Saturday in November, when Tyler fell off his bicycle in Sarah's driveway and scraped his knee badly enough to require immediate attention. Jennifer had stepped inside to use the bathroom, and Sarah was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard Tyler's frightened crying from outside. By the time Sarah reached the front door, Honey was already sitting beside the injured boy, gently licking his face and staying close, while he sobbed from pain and shock. Sarah quickly cleaned and bandaged Tyler's wound, while Honey maintained her vigil beside him, seeming to understand that the little boy needed comfort and protection. When Jennifer emerged from the bathroom to find Tyler cuddled against Honey's warm fur, still sniffling but no longer hysterical, she witnessed firsthand the intuitive compassion that made Honey such an exceptional companion. She knew he was hurt, Jennifer said with wonder, watching Honey carefully position herself so Tyler could lean against her without putting pressure on his injured knee. She went straight to him and stayed with him until help came. "I've never seen anything like it." Sarah felt proud of Honey's response but not surprised. She had experienced that same intuitive care during her darkest days of grief, when Honey had seemed to understand exactly what kind of comfort Sarah needed. Jennifer called Michael immediately to report the incident, not because Tyler's injury was serious, but because she wanted Michael to understand the kind of character and intelligence his mother's dog possessed. Sarah could hear only Jennifer's side of the conversation, but the tone suggested that she was making a passionate case for Honey's value as a family member, rather than viewing her as a potential threat. That evening, Michael called Sarah directly for the second time since their confrontation. His voice was subdued and thoughtful, lacking the defensive edge that had characterized their previous conversations. "Jennifer told me what happened with Tyler today," he began, pausing as if he was struggling to find the right words. "She said Honey took care of him when he got hurt." Sarah felt a surge of protective pride for her beloved companion. "She's very intuitive about people's emotions and needs," Sarah said simply. "She seems to understand when someone is hurting and needs comfort. It's one of the reasons I love her so much." She resisted the urge to point out that this incident proved everything she had been trying to tell Michael about Honey's gentle nature and positive impact on their family. Michael was quiet for a long moment before continuing. "Mom, I think I owe you an apology. I've been so focused on potential problems that I haven't been willing to see the actual benefits. Jennifer says the kids adore Honey, and you seem happier than you've been since Dad died. Maybe I was wrong to try to force you to give her up." The apology was tentative and incomplete, but Sarah recognized it as a significant step for her proud son. She could hear the effort it was costing him to admit that his judgment might have been flawed, and she appreciated his willingness to reconsider his position. "I understand that you were worried about me, Michael, but I needed you to trust that I could make good decisions about my own life. Honey isn't a burden or a risk. She's a companion who helps me be the best version of myself." Michael's next words surprised Sarah with their vulnerability and insight. "I think I've been trying to control too many things since Dad died. Losing him made me feel like I had to protect everyone I love from any possible harm, but I ended up creating harm instead. I'm sorry I made you choose between me and Honey. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't loving. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she heard echoes of the thoughtful, compassionate young man Michael had been before fear and responsibility had made him rigid and controlling. "I never wanted to choose between you and Honey," Sarah said softly. "I just needed you to accept that loving her doesn't diminish my love for you or the children. There's room in my heart for everyone who matters to me." The conversation ended with Michael tentatively agreeing to visit Sarah's house the following weekend, with the understanding that Honey would be present and part of their interaction. Sarah felt nervous about this reunion, knowing that the success or failure of this visit might determine the future of their relationship. She spent the week preparing both herself and Honey for what felt like the most important test of their partnership. Sarah decided to approach the visit as an opportunity to demonstrate the positive changes in her life rather than a chance to prove Michael wrong about Honey. She planned a simple meal that wouldn't require constant attention, giving her the freedom to focus on facilitating a comfortable interaction between Michael and Honey. She also prepared mentally for the possibility that Michael might still struggle to accept Honey, reminding herself that his opinion didn't determine her choices about her own life. The morning of Michael's visit, Sarah bathed and groomed Honey until her golden coat gleamed, then spent extra time on her own appearance, wanting to present herself as confident and competent rather than defensive or apologetic. She reminded Honey of her best manners and practiced their usual commands, though she suspected that Honey's natural charm would be more persuasive than any formal obedience demonstration. When Michael's car pulled into the driveway, Sarah felt her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Through the window, she could see him sitting in his car for a moment before getting out, apparently gathering his own courage for this encounter. Honey sensed the importance of the moment and positioned herself calmly beside Sarah, as if she understood that this visit would determine her acceptance into the family she loved. Michael knocked on the front door instead of using his key, a gesture that acknowledged the formal nature of this reconciliation attempt. When Sarah opened the door, she was struck by how much older and more tired her son looked, as if the months of conflict had taken a toll on him as well. Honey remained sitting beside Sarah, her tail wagging gently but her body language respectful and non-threatening. "Hello, Michael," Sarah said warmly, stepping aside to invite him in. "I'm glad you came." She deliberately didn't mention Honey or call attention to the dog's presence, allowing Michael to make his own observations and approach at his own pace. Michael entered the house cautiously, his eyes immediately going to Honey, who continued to sit calmly beside Sarah. "She's bigger than I remembered," he said, his tone neutral but not hostile. Sarah could see him taking in Honey's well-groomed appearance, her perfect posture, and her attentive but non-demanding expression. "Would you like some coffee?" Sarah offered, moving toward the kitchen in a way that would naturally separate her from Honey and give Michael space to observe the dog without feeling pressured to interact. Honey remained in the living room, settling into her usual spot on the rug near the fireplace, demonstrating the excellent house manners that Sarah had worked so hard to develop. Over coffee, Sarah and Michael talked carefully about neutral topics: the children's school progress, Michael's work projects, Sarah's plans for the holidays. Throughout their conversation, Honey remained quietly in the background, occasionally shifting position, but never demanding attention or creating any disturbance. Sarah could see Michael glancing at Honey periodically, clearly reassessing his assumptions about the chaos and disruption he had expected. The turning point came when Emma and Tyler arrived with Jennifer for what had been planned as a brief pickup visit. The children burst through the front door with their usual energy, immediately seeking out Honey for their customary greeting ritual. Michael watched with visible surprise as Honey responded to the children's enthusiasm with gentle affection, allowing them to hug her and pet her without becoming overstimulated or losing her composure. "Daddy, this is Honey," Emma announced proudly, as if she was introducing her father to a dear friend. "She knows how to shake hands and sit and stay, and she never begs for food even when we're eating something really good." Emma demonstrated Honey's obedient skills with the confidence of someone who had practiced these commands many times. Tyler, still bearing a small bandage on his knee from his recent bicycle accident, immediately settled beside Honey and began telling his father about the dog's heroic response to his injury. "She knew I was hurt, Daddy, and she came to take care of me until Grandma could fix my knee. She's really smart and really nice." Michael listened to his children's enthusiastic testimonials with an expression that shifted from skepticism to curiosity, to something approaching admiration. Sarah could see him processing the evidence of his own eyes. His children were happy, safe, and clearly benefiting from their relationship with Honey. The dog he had characterized as dangerous and disruptive was calm, obedient, and obviously devoted to the family's well-being. When Jennifer suggested that they all take a walk together, Michael surprised everyone by agreeing. Sarah attached Honey's leash and handed it to Emma, who had been begging for the privilege of walking Honey herself. As they strolled through Sarah's neighborhood, Michael had the opportunity to observe Honey's behavior in public, noting her excellent leash manners and friendly but controlled interactions with other dogs and people they encountered. At the neighborhood park, Michael watched Honey play fetch with the children, marveling at her ability to match her energy level to theirs while remaining gentle and careful. When a smaller child approached wanting to pet Honey, Michael observed how naturally the dog lowered herself to the child's level and accepted attention with patience and grace. "She's really well trained," Michael admitted to Sarah as they sat on a park bench watching their family play together. "I can see why the kids love her. She's nothing like what I expected." Sarah felt a surge of vindication but kept her response modest and gracious. "She's been a wonderful addition to our family," Sarah said simply. "I know you were concerned about safety and responsibility, but she's actually made my life better in every way. I'm more active, more social, and definitely less lonely. She's been exactly what I needed." Michael was quiet for several minutes, watching Honey interact with his children, and apparently processing the reality of the situation versus his fears and assumptions. "Mom, I think I was wrong about a lot of things," he said finally. "I was so worried about potential problems that I didn't consider the actual benefits. You seem happier and more confident than I've seen you in years." Sarah felt the careful wall she had built around her heart beginning to soften as she heard genuine recognition and respect in her son's voice. "I needed to make this choice for myself, Michael. Even if it had turned out badly, I needed to know that I was capable of making my own decisions about my life. But it didn't turn out badly. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made." The visit ended with tentative plans for regular family dinners at Sarah's house, with the understanding that Honey would be included as a natural part of their gatherings. Michael even agreed to bring his family for Thanksgiving dinner, acknowledging that Sarah's house felt more like home when it included all the members of their extended family, including the four-legged one. As they prepared to leave, Michael approached Honey directly for the first time, kneeling down to her level and extending his hand for her to sniff. Honey responded with her characteristic gentle warmth, placing her paw in his hand when he asked her to shake, and looking up at him with the trusting expression that had first captured Sarah's heart at the shelter. "I'm sorry I misjudged you," Michael said quietly to Honey, stroking her golden ears. "Thank you for taking such good care of my mom and my kids." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she watched her son finally recognize what she had been trying to tell him for months: that Honey was not a threat to their family, but a blessing that made their family stronger and more complete. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Sarah sat with Honey in their favorite spot on the sofa, reflecting on the transformation that had taken place in their lives. The journey from Michael's ultimatum to this moment of acceptance had been painful and difficult, but it had ultimately led to something more valuable than simple peace. Sarah had rediscovered her own strength and autonomy, while Michael had learned to respect her judgment and independence. More importantly, Sarah had learned that love without conditions was more precious than approval earned through compliance. Honey's unconditional devotion had given Sarah the foundation she needed to stand up for herself and demand the same respect from her human family members. The dog, who had been characterized as a threat to family harmony, had actually become the catalyst for creating a healthier, more honest dynamic between Sarah and her son. As the months passed, the new equilibrium in Sarah's family life became natural and comfortable. Michael's visits became more frequent and relaxed, with Honey's presence adding warmth and joy to their gatherings rather than tension and conflict. Emma and Tyler's relationship with their grandmother deepened as they shared the responsibility of caring for Honey and learned valuable lessons about compassion, loyalty, and unconditional love. Jennifer became one of Honey's biggest advocates, often commenting on how much calmer and happier the family gatherings felt when they included the dog's gentle presence. She began bringing her camera to capture moments of the children playing with Honey, creating a photo album that documented the joy and connection that Michael had almost forced them to sacrifice. Sarah's confidence continued to grow as she navigated other relationships and situations with the same assertiveness she had discovered during her confrontation with Michael. She negotiated a more flexible work schedule that allowed her to spend more time with Honey and pursue volunteer opportunities that interested her. She joined a hiking group for seniors and their dogs, expanding her social circle and discovering new adventures that enriched both her life and Honey's. The transformation was perhaps most evident during Sarah's annual physical exam, when Dr. Peterson commented on her improved mood, energy level, and overall health indicators. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up," the doctor said with approval. "You seem more vital and engaged than I've seen you in years." Sarah smiled, knowing that her improved well-being was directly connected to her decision to fight for the relationship that mattered most to her. On the first anniversary of Honey's return from the shelter, Sarah organized a small celebration that included Michael's family and several of her new friends from the hiking group. As she watched Honey surrounded by people who loved and appreciated her, Sarah reflected on the courage it had taken to reclaim her companion and the profound changes that decision had created in her life. The woman who had surrendered Honey out of fear and desperation was barely recognizable in the confident, independent person Sarah had become. She had learned that true family relationships were built on mutual respect and acceptance, rather than control and manipulation. She had discovered that standing up for her principles, even when it was difficult and scary, was essential to maintaining her integrity and self-respect. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that love multiplied, rather than divided, when it was given freely and authentically. Her love for Honey had not diminished her love for Michael and her grandchildren. Instead, it had taught her to love more deeply and more courageously, refusing to accept conditions and ultimatums that would force her to choose between the relationships that defined her life. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah felt Honey's warm weight against her leg, and knew that she had made the right choice in that moment of crisis a year ago. The decision to fight for Honey had ultimately been a decision to fight for herself, and both of them were stronger and happier because Sarah had found the courage to stand up for what mattered most. The evening ended with Michael helping Sarah clean up while the children played one last game with Honey in the backyard. As they worked together in comfortable companionship, Michael made an observation that touched Sarah's heart and confirmed the wisdom of her difficult choice. "Mom, I want you to know that I respect what you did," Michael said as he dried the dinner dishes. "It took courage to stand up to me, and it took wisdom to know what was really important in your life. Honey has been good for you, and she's been good for our whole family. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Sarah hugged her son, feeling the warmth of genuine reconciliation and mutual respect. "I love you, Michael, and I'm grateful that we found our way back to each other. Sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the strongest relationships." As they stood together in Sarah's kitchen, with the sounds of laughter and play drifting in from the backyard, Sarah knew that her family was complete, and her heart was full. The story could have ended differently. Sarah could have remained without Honey, accepting loneliness and resentment as the price of maintaining peace with her son. Michael could have persisted in his controlling behavior, never learning to respect his mother's autonomy and judgment. The family could have remained fractured, with ultimatums and fear defining their interactions instead of love and acceptance. But because Sarah found the courage to fight for what mattered most to her, because she was willing to risk everything to reclaim her authentic self, the story became one of transformation and redemption, rather than loss and regret. Her decision to rescue Honey from the shelter for the second time had ultimately rescued her entire family from a dynamic that was built on control rather than love. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, with Honey already settled in her favorite spot at the foot of the bed, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought them to this place of peace and acceptance. The rain that had been falling on the night she first realized her mistake had washed away more than just the dust from her windows. It had washed away her willingness to sacrifice her own happiness for someone else's approval, her tendency to doubt her own judgment when others disagreed with her choices. In its place, the storm had left something stronger and more beautiful. The knowledge that she was capable of fighting for what she loved. The understanding that true family relationships could survive honest conflict and emerge stronger. and the certainty that her own heart was a reliable guide when it came to making the choices that would define the rest of her life. Sarah turned off the lights and settled into sleep, listening to Honey's steady breathing and feeling profoundly grateful for the companion who had taught her that love without conditions was not only possible, but necessary for a life lived with authenticity and courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Sarah would face them with confidence, knowing that she had already proven to herself that she was strong enough to stand up for what mattered most. 2 years had passed since that transformative November evening, when Michael finally accepted Honey as a cherished member of their family, and Sarah's life had blossomed in ways she never could have imagined during those dark days of ultimatums and impossible choices. The confident woman who now stood in her kitchen preparing breakfast for herself and Honey bore little resemblance to the frightened, grieving widow who had once prioritized other people's approval over her own well-being and happiness. Sarah had become something of a local celebrity in her neighborhood, known as the woman who had fought for her dog and won back her family in the process. Her story had spread through the close-knit community of dog owners at Laurelhurst Park, inspiring other pet parents who faced pressure from family members to give up their beloved companions. She found herself frequently offering advice and support to people struggling with similar conflicts, sharing the wisdom she had gained through her own painful but ultimately triumphant journey. The transformation extended far beyond her relationship with Michael and her role as Honey's devoted guardian. Sarah had discovered reserves of strength and independence that had lain dormant during her years of marriage and early widowhood. She had learned to trust her own judgment completely, to advocate for her needs without apology, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear of abandonment or conflict. Her work life had evolved as well. Sarah had transitioned from full-time nursing to a consulting role that allowed her greater flexibility to pursue the activities and relationships that brought her joy. She had started a support group for widowed seniors at the community center, using her experience with grief and recovery to help others navigate the challenging transition from married life to independence. The group had grown from 3 members to over 20, with Sarah facilitating weekly meetings that combined practical advice about living alone with emotional support for processing loss and rebuilding identity. Honey had become the unofficial therapy dog for the support group, attending meetings and providing comfort to members who were struggling with particularly difficult emotions. Her gentle presence and intuitive understanding of human distress made her a valuable partner in Sarah's volunteer work. Several group members had been inspired by Sarah's story to adopt pets of their own, finding that animal companionship provided the structure and purpose they needed to move forward with their lives. The success of the support group had led to other opportunities for Sarah to share her expertise and experience. She had been invited to speak at conferences about pet therapy for seniors, grief recovery, and the importance of maintaining autonomy in family relationships. These speaking engagements had connected Sarah with a broader community of advocates and professionals who shared her passion for helping older adults live fulfilling, independent lives. Emma, now 11 years old, had become Honey's most devoted student and advocate. She had read numerous books about dog training and behavior, practiced advanced commands with Honey during their visits, and even convinced her parents to let her volunteer at the local animal shelter on weekends. Emma's love for Honey had sparked a genuine interest in animal welfare that was shaping her academic interests and future career aspirations. During a recent visit, Emma had approached Sarah with a serious expression and an important question. "Grandma Sarah, do you think I could become a veterinarian like Dr. Martinez, who takes care of Honey?" The pride and joy Sarah felt at her granddaughter's ambition was matched only by her gratitude that Emma had been able to develop this passion because Sarah had been brave enough to keep Honey in their lives. Tyler, now 8 years old, had overcome his early fears and allergies to become Honey's enthusiastic playmate and protector. He had learned to read Honey's body language and respond to her needs with the same intuitive understanding that Honey showed toward human emotions. Tyler's confidence had grown tremendously through his relationship with Honey, and he no longer showed signs of the anxiety and shyness that had characterized his early childhood. The boy, who had once been afraid of dogs, now frequently asked his parents if they could adopt a pet of their own. Jennifer had begun researching dog breeds and visiting local shelters, recognizing that Tyler's relationship with Honey had taught him valuable lessons about responsibility, empathy, and unconditional love. The family was seriously considering adding a canine member to their household, a development that would have seemed impossible during the dark days of Michael's ultimatum. Michael himself had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of anyone in the family. The controlling, anxious man who had once demanded that Sarah choose between her dog and her family had evolved into someone who actively celebrated the positive changes that Honey had brought to their lives. He had learned to recognize his own tendency toward manipulation and control, working with a therapist to develop healthier ways of expressing concern and affection for his family members. The therapy had helped Michael understand that his father's death had triggered deep-seated fears about loss and powerlessness that he had tried to manage by controlling his mother's choices and environment. Learning to separate his anxiety from his genuine care for Sarah's well-being had been challenging but ultimately liberating for both of them. Their relationship had become more honest and equal, with Michael respecting Sarah's autonomy while still maintaining his role as a caring and supportive son. Michael had also become an unexpected advocate for the human-animal bond, sharing Sarah's story with colleagues and friends who faced similar family conflicts over pet ownership. He had come to understand that his mother's relationship with Honey was not a sign of loneliness or poor judgment, but evidence of her capacity for love, loyalty, and the kind of authentic connection that enriched rather than diminished her life. The annual Thanksgiving dinner at Sarah's house had become a cherished tradition that included not just Michael's immediate family, but also several members of Sarah's support group and their pets. The gathering had evolved into a celebration of found family and chosen community, with Honey serving as the gracious hostess who welcomed both longtime friends and newcomers with equal enthusiasm and warmth. During the most recent Thanksgiving celebration, Sarah had looked around her dining room table at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by her story and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought them all together. The holiday that had once been a source of loneliness and grief had become a joyful affirmation of the family and community she had built through courage, persistence, and unwavering loyalty to her principles. Jennifer had become one of Sarah's closest confidants and supporters, often commenting that her mother-in-law's transformation had inspired her to be more assertive in her own relationships and life choices. The two women had developed a friendship that extended beyond their shared connection to Michael and the children, bonding over their mutual love for their pets and their commitment to creating authentic, loving relationships within their family. Dr. Martinez, Honey's veterinarian, had also become an important part of Sarah's extended community. The compassionate doctor had followed Sarah's story with professional and personal interest, using it as an example when counseling other pet owners who faced pressure to surrender their animals due to family conflicts or housing restrictions. Dr. Martinez had invited Sarah to speak at several veterinary conferences about the importance of considering the human-animal bond when making recommendations about pet care and ownership. The speaking engagements had connected Sarah with researchers and advocates who were documenting the health benefits of pet ownership for seniors. She had participated in several studies about the impact of animal companionship on physical activity, mental health, and social connection among older adults. The data consistently supported what Sarah knew from personal experience: that her relationship with Honey had improved virtually every aspect of her well-being and quality of life. Sarah's story had also reached beyond the local community through social media and online forums dedicated to pet advocacy and senior empowerment. She had received letters and emails from people around the country who had been inspired by her example to stand up for their own relationships with beloved pets. Some had faced similar ultimatums from family members, while others had been pressured by housing situations, financial concerns, or health challenges to give up their animal companions. Each message reinforced Sarah's understanding that her decision to fight for Honey had been about more than just one woman and one dog. It had been about the fundamental right of individuals to make choices about their own lives based on love, wisdom, and personal values, rather than fear, manipulation, or external pressure. The courage she had found in that moment of crisis had inspired others to find their own strength when faced with impossible choices. One particularly moving correspondence had come from a woman named Patricia in Denver, whose adult daughter had issued a similar ultimatum about Patricia's elderly cat. Patricia had read about Sarah's story online and found the courage to refuse her daughter's demands, ultimately strengthening their relationship by establishing healthier boundaries. The cat, who had been Patricia's constant companion through chemotherapy treatments, remained in her loving home where she belonged. Another letter had arrived from a man named Robert, whose family had pressured him to surrender his service dog after he moved into a senior living facility. Inspired by Sarah's example, Robert had researched his legal rights and successfully advocated for his dog to remain with him in his new housing situation. The facility had ultimately changed their pet policy to accommodate other residents who could benefit from animal companionship. These stories reminded Sarah that individual acts of courage could create ripple effects that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. By refusing to surrender Honey, Sarah had not only transformed her own life, but had also contributed to a broader movement of people who were willing to fight for the relationships and values that mattered most to them. The impact of Sarah's transformation had been particularly evident during a recent crisis that tested the strength and resilience of the new family dynamic she had worked so hard to create. Jennifer had been diagnosed with breast cancer, a devastating development that threw the entire family into emotional turmoil and practical chaos. The diagnosis had triggered Michael's old patterns of anxiety and controlling behavior, as he struggled to cope with another potential loss while managing his fear and helplessness. During the weeks following Jennifer's diagnosis, Sarah had emerged as a source of calm strength and practical support for her family. Her experience with grief and recovery, combined with her professional background in healthcare, had equipped her to navigate the medical system and provide emotional support during this frightening time. More importantly, her hard-won confidence and independence had allowed her to step into a leadership role without sacrificing her own well-being or boundaries. Honey had proved invaluable during this difficult period, providing comfort and stability for the children while their mother underwent treatment and their father struggled with his own emotional challenges. Emma and Tyler found solace in caring for Honey during their frequent stays at Sarah's house, channeling their worry and fear into positive activities that strengthened their bond with their grandmother and her beloved companion. The cancer diagnosis had also created an opportunity for healing and growth within the family relationships. Michael had been forced to confront his own limitations and accept help from his mother, reversing the power dynamic that had characterized their relationship for so many years. Sarah's competence and strength during the crisis had finally convinced Michael that his attempts to control and protect her had been unnecessary and counterproductive. Jennifer's treatment had been successful, with an excellent prognosis for full recovery, but the experience had reinforced for everyone the importance of cherishing the relationships and moments that truly mattered. The family had emerged from the crisis stronger and more connected, with a deeper appreciation for the love and support they provided for each other during difficult times. The experience had also highlighted the crucial role that Honey played in their family's emotional ecosystem. Her calming presence, intuitive responses to stress and sadness, and ability to bring joy and comfort during dark moments had made her an invaluable member of their support system. Michael had expressed genuine gratitude for Honey's contributions to their family's well-being, acknowledging that his mother's instincts about the dog's value had been completely correct. As Sarah reflected on the journey from that first ultimatum to this place of security and acceptance, she was struck by how many of the fears that had motivated her original surrender of Honey had proved to be unfounded. Her health and mobility had actually improved through the regular exercise and activity that dog ownership required. Her financial situation had remained stable, despite the costs of pet care, which had proved to be far less burdensome than Michael had predicted. Most importantly, the social isolation that Michael had worried about had been replaced by a rich network of relationships and activities centered around Sarah's involvement in the pet community and her advocacy work. Rather than limiting her options for the future, her commitment to Honey had opened doors to new experiences, friendships, and opportunities for growth and contribution. Sarah had also discovered that her relationship with Honey had prepared her for other challenges and transitions that came with aging. The daily routine of caring for another living being had kept her engaged and purposeful during periods when she might otherwise have become isolated or depressed. The unconditional love and acceptance she received from Honey had bolstered her confidence and self-worth when other relationships became more complicated or demanding. Looking toward the future, Sarah felt optimistic about her ability to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. She had established a comprehensive plan for Honey's care that included provisions for various scenarios, from temporary health issues to long-term care needs. Emma had already volunteered to take responsibility for Honey if anything happened to Sarah, ensuring that the dog would remain within the loving family circle they had all worked so hard to preserve. The legal and financial arrangements Sarah had made reflected her commitment to maintaining control over her own life, while also being realistic about potential future needs. She had consulted with elder law attorneys, updated her will and healthcare directives, and established emergency care plans that prioritized both her own well-being and Honey's continued security. The thorough planning had given her peace of mind, while also demonstrating to Michael that her devotion to Honey did not prevent her from being responsible about practical considerations. Sarah had also begun mentoring other seniors who were navigating similar decisions about pet ownership and family relationships. She had developed a workshop series called Aging with Dignity and Companionship that addressed the practical and emotional aspects of maintaining independence while building supportive community connections. The workshops covered topics ranging from pet care planning to assertiveness training to building chosen family networks. The workshop series had become so popular that Sarah had been invited to present at senior centers and community organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Her message of empowerment and self-determination resonated with audiences who were facing their own struggles with family expectations, health challenges, and social isolation. Many participants left the workshops with concrete plans for enriching their lives through animal companionship or other meaningful relationships. Honey had become an integral part of these presentations, serving as a living example of the joy and purpose that the human-animal bond could bring to later life. Her calm demeanor and obvious devotion to Sarah helped illustrate the practical benefits of pet ownership, while also touching the hearts of audience members who were considering welcoming an animal companion into their own lives. The success of Sarah's advocacy work had led to invitations to serve on several boards and committees focused on aging issues and animal welfare. She had become a respected voice in policy discussions about pet-friendly housing for seniors, the therapeutic benefits of animal-assisted interventions, and the importance of maintaining social connections during life transitions. Her unique perspective as someone who had almost lost her beloved companion due to family pressure had made her a powerful advocate for protecting the rights of older adults to make their own choices about relationships and lifestyle. One of Sarah's most meaningful accomplishments had been the establishment of a small grant fund that helped seniors cover the costs of pet care during financial emergencies. The fund, administered through the local Humane Society, had prevented numerous pet surrenders by providing temporary assistance for veterinary bills, pet supplies, and emergency boarding. Sarah had seeded the fund with her own donation and had successfully solicited contributions from local businesses and community organizations that supported her mission. The grant fund had helped dozens of seniors maintain their relationships with beloved pets during health crises, housing transitions, and financial hardships. Each success story reinforced Sarah's conviction that the human-animal bond was worth protecting and preserving, even when circumstances made pet ownership challenging. The fund had also created opportunities for Sarah to connect with other pet advocates and expand her network of supporters and collaborators. As Sarah approached her 67th birthday, she felt more fulfilled and purposeful than she had ever imagined possible during those dark days following Robert's death. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through her relationships with others had discovered her own strength, voice, and capacity for leadership. She had learned that protecting what mattered most to her had required courage, but that courage had been rewarded with a life of greater authenticity, connection, and joy. The anniversary of Honey's return from the shelter had become an annual celebration that brought together all the people whose lives had been touched by their story. This year's gathering was particularly special, as it marked 3 years since Sarah had found the courage to reclaim her beloved companion and, in doing so, had reclaimed herself. The celebration included not just family and close friends, but also members of Sarah's support group, fellow pet advocates, and several people who had been inspired by her example to make their own brave choices. Emma had prepared a special presentation for the anniversary celebration, creating a photo album that documented Honey's integration into their family, and the positive changes that had resulted from Sarah's decision to fight for her. The album included pictures of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, hiking adventures, and quiet moments of companionship that captured the joy and love that Honey had brought to their lives. Tyler had written a poem about Honey that he read aloud to the gathering, his young voice clear and confident, as he described the ways that Sarah's dog had enriched his childhood and taught him important lessons about loyalty, courage, and standing up for what you believe in. The poem brought tears to many eyes, including Sarah's, as she reflected on how different their family might have been if she had allowed fear to override love. Michael had prepared his own tribute to mark the anniversary, acknowledging publicly the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned from his mother's example. His speech was deeply personal and emotionally honest, revealing the growth and self-reflection that had transformed him from a controlling son into a supportive advocate for his mother's autonomy and happiness. Jennifer had created a video montage featuring interviews with family members, friends, and community members who had been impacted by Sarah's story. The video captured the ripple effects of one woman's courage to fight for what mattered most to her, showing how individual acts of bravery could inspire others to make their own transformative choices. The celebration concluded with Sarah's own reflection on the journey that had brought them all together. Standing in her living room surrounded by people who loved and supported her, with Honey resting peacefully at her feet, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the courage that had allowed her to reclaim her authentic life. 3 years ago, I thought I was choosing between my dog and my family, Sarah said, her voice steady and confident. What I discovered was that I was really choosing between fear and love, between compliance and authenticity, between the person other people wanted me to be and the person I knew I really was. Honey didn't just give me companionship. She gave me the courage to be myself and the strength to fight for what I knew was right. Sarah paused to look around the room at the faces of people whose lives had been enriched by her decision to stand up for her principles. The greatest gift of this experience has been learning that love multiplies when we have the courage to protect it. By fighting for Honey, I didn't lose my family. I helped all of us learn how to love each other more honestly and completely. The evening ended with promises to continue supporting each other through whatever challenges and celebrations lay ahead. As guests departed, many stopped to thank Sarah for the inspiration and support she had provided during their own difficult times. The gratitude and affection she received confirmed that her story had become larger than just one woman and her dog. It had become a testament to the power of courage, love, and the refusal to accept limitations on one's capacity for happiness and authentic connection. Later that night, as Sarah prepared for bed with Honey settled comfortably in her favorite spot, she reflected on the unexpected ways that standing up for her dog had transformed every aspect of her life. The decision that had seemed so difficult and frightening at the time had opened doors to experiences, relationships, and opportunities she could never have imagined. The courage she had found in that moment of crisis had become a renewable resource that continued to guide her choices and actions. Sarah understood now that the ultimatum Michael had delivered had been an opportunity disguised as a threat. It had forced her to clarify her values, discover her strength, and claim her right to make her own choices about how to live her life. The painful process of standing up to her son had ultimately led to a healthier, more honest relationship with him, and had established patterns of communication and respect that would serve their family well in the years to come. As she settled into sleep, Sarah felt profound peace and satisfaction with the life she had built through courage, persistence, and unwavering commitment to love. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to make a difference in the world, to support others who were facing their own impossible choices, and to continue growing into the fullest expression of her authentic self. The rain that had once symbolized the storms of conflict and crisis now sounded like a gentle lullaby, washing away the last traces of doubt and fear that had once clouded Sarah's judgment. In its place was the clear certainty that she had made the right choice, not just for herself and Honey, but for everyone who had been touched by their story of courage, transformation, and the triumph of love over fear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.